Welcome to F8 Audit and Assurance. My name is Martin Jones and I will be taking you through an introduction to this paper. F8 is a fundamental paper. F stands for fundamental and 8 means it's the 8th paper. So it's towards the end of the fundamentals. There are 9, F1 to 9, and this is the 8th of those papers. It's a relatively challenging paper and far more difficult than it looks. I'm going to flick now to my second page and tell you what F8 is all about. As you see there, I've made 3 points in particular what F8 is all about. It's an audit paper testing the core of assurance issues. I mean, that's it. It's a fundamental audit paper. It's checking that you understand basic concepts in auditing, such concepts as substantive tests and control tests, such concepts as risk and reporting. It really is the core of audit, and it doesn't really qualify you to be an auditor, but frankly it gives you plenty enough for you to have a damn good go at audit in real life. So it really does cover a very broad church of subjects within audit. It covers everything really in audit, not to very great depth, but very comprehensive coverage. So it covers everything in audit, and it's testing whether you've got the idea of how audit works. That's the basis of F8. As I've made the comment, my second comment is that it's a mix of knowledge and application, and that's absolutely right. It really is a knowledge paper. It's very much a knowledge paper. Learning. But the truth of the matter is you can never do an audit without doing some thinking. So it definitely is a mix of knowledge and application. It's definitely a mix of analysis and, just regurgitating information. And my last point is that it's much harder than it looks. It is much harder than it looks. When I work through these illustrative questions, when I work through the questions, it looks quite easy what I'm doing, but it's actually quite tricky. Audit involves scenarios. It's based upon scenarios. The examiner gives you a scenario and then asks you to analyse the scenario and answer a specific requirement. And the thing is about audit is it has very much its own language. It sounds like English. It even looks like English, but really the language of audit is the language of audit, and it isn't English at all. And that's the trick, really. It's getting your head around the linguistics. It's an almost mathematical way of using the English language, and that's what makes it really tricky. Another thing that makes it really tricky is it's exceptionally boring, and therefore there's a temptation to do almost no work on it. So it looks easy and it's boring. The temptation is to do very little work on it, but it's far, far harder than it looks. And the more you practice it, the more you start to realise it's quite difficult, and the better you get, the more likely you are to pass. The more you sit back and just, sort of hope that it's going to sweep over you and you'll just sort of absorb this information, the more you're likely to fail. Okay, so that's enough of that. That's what F8 is all about. So I'm going to look at the syllabus areas now. The F8 examination is very much scenario-based, and the examiner takes the right to bounce around in the syllabus and basically examine fundamental audit. So the examiner does make reference to the syllabus, but perhaps not as directly as, she's thinking to herself, I'm going to examine syllabus area B now. Okay, that's done, now I'm going to do D. It doesn't really work like that. It's more sort of mished and mashed up. But anyway, I'm going to quickly go through the ideas of the syllabus. The first one is the audit framework. And the audit framework is just as it sounds. It's the regulation and how you have to behave. It's got the ethics in there. The next one is internal audit, which is actually quite a small subject, although it's given a whole heading, which is a bit odd. It's what it sounds like. In almost every question, we are what's called the external auditors, auditing the financial statements. But we can make use of what are called the internal auditors, and that qualifies for its own whole syllabus area, surprisingly. Planning, risk, absolutely critical. Real-life audit involves giving the maximum assurance with the minimum work. Real-life audit is all based on money. It all comes down to profit. It comes down to money. And the way to get to the audit report quickest with the least risk of giving the wrong opinion is by a technique known as planning, and therefore planning plays a massive part in real audit, and consequently it plays a massive part in the exam. It plays a massive part in the exam. It's huge. Internal control is two things. It's first of all the internal controls themselves, and then it's our testing of those controls. Audit evidence is the big one. That's substantive testing. Most of auditing is based on this concept called substantive testing. An audit requires us to audit the financial statements of an entity and give our opinion on those financial statements. In order to audit these financial statements, we look at each line one by one and we substantiate that each line shows a true and fair view. So audit is based upon auditing financial statements. Financial statements has got lines and we substantiate each line. Really, audit is all about that particular line, the audit evidence syllabus area E, as you see up there. So that's the biggie, it's the massive one. F and G are bundled together. There isn't really much difference between review and reporting. Review is the process of checking your evidence to see that it's sufficient, but also reviewing the final statement, the final financial statements, making sure they're okay, and then giving your report. Reporting is all about saying, yes, the financial statements do show a true and fair view, or no, the financial statements don't show a true and fair view. And your opinion in reporting, which as you can see is G, is based upon your review in F. So there isn't really much difference between review and reporting. They're basically two sides of the same coin. So that's a quick look at the syllabus areas. Moving on.